listening and saying, "Hey, I write." What?
Right. Yeah. Well, literary. So you need to be reading the very best writers. That doesn't mean that you can't read what you enjoy, but you need to be reading the very best writers. When I teach creative writing, I encourage my students to read from the literary canon. I'm a great fan of Melville's, fan of Jane Austen, but I also want them to be reading contemporary things so they know the sorts of things that are being published now in the best literary journals. This is something that I actually just talked with, it was my class about, my creative writing class. Back in 1973, I believe it was, I actually heard President Kimball give a talk at BYU challenging Mormon artists, to go beyond the mediocre. And he talked about the works that had inspired him, and included Faust, Goethe's Faust, included all of Shakespeare, specifically addressing King Lear, included Ben-Hur, which he said, it may not be great fiction, but I loved it as a young man, and then said, Shakespeare, surely there's not just one Shakespeare. Can we not have Mormon Shakespeares, Mormon Miltons? So challenging us to do better than we had been doing, because we were producing kind of what we call home literature, which is securely within the boundaries of Mormonism, and the big thing at stake maybe is the couple going to get married in the temple or not. And that may seem gigantic to us, but as far as having relevance beyond where we are, it's not the biggest question. So that encouragement to do really fine literature was something President Kimball felt deeply about, and that was subsequently, it was in the first presidency message published in the Ensign, and I included in my supplement for my students to read, with some other articles on Mormon fiction, especially by Orson Scott Card, who is LDS. I think most people know that, but has also written about the challenges that Mormon artists face, beyond a lot of self-censoring, and then a lot of times things that people will accept from other artists they will not accept from Mormon artists, which is an interesting conundrum. But Card writes quite eloquently about the demands of Mormon art.
So what draws you to the literary world?
I've always, I'm thinking as a child, I was kind of a daydreamer. I think that goes with the creative personality.
Yeah.
And daydreaming kind of involves moving into other worlds, imaginary worlds. I'm not so much into fantasy sci-fi. I find 2/3 of my students always are. But I loved, from the time I was in high school, and I have to admit, it wasn't an immediate thing. In elementary school, reading was not something I liked. I read Baby Island, I think, like 10 times, because it was the only book that really grabbed my attention. People kept asking me to try something else, but I didn't. And then the great confession of any English teacher, I used Cliff Notes. I think they're Spark Notes now, to get through some of my English classes. But then when I was a senior in high school, Mrs. DeHart at Provo High had us read the Brothers Karamazov. And she gave us an abridged copy to read, but I went and got the unabridged and read it, and that was where my life was changed.
That's quite a book for a high school student.
Oh yeah, well it was I guess they'd call them an AP class now. It was, these were students who were serious about their academic futures, and I would say most of the kids in the class have gone on to have academic futures. A lot are professors or lawyers, or lawyers aren't necessarily academic, but a lot of us went on to pursue more, a lot became English majors. But that, especially the legend of the Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov, just fascinated me. And I kept going back and back, and in fact, when I did a theater project, I chose to do a one-act play of the legend of the Grand Inquisitor. So I had good portions of it memorized. But the book itself, that turned me into a reader. It was Dostoevsky who turned me into a reader. And in fact, I took Russian for a couple of years too, hoping that I could read him in the original, and went on to read his other books. But that opened my world, and my tastes became rather picky. When you set the bar at Dostoevsky, you're not going to be content with sentences that Garrison Keillor says a poem that starts out clunky never gets good.
Yeah.
So I can look at a novel or a short story and look down one page to see how the sentences flow and how they're structured, and immediately judge where it's going to fall between mediocrity and excellence. And I choose not to, for my own reading, I choose not to read mediocre things. I do, of course, read it professionally because I teach it, and so I'm trying to help writers who are struggling find their own voices and learn how to write really well, which anyone can do if they're determined to do it.
Something you said right at the beginning of that reminded me of a conversation I was just having with my wife yesterday. My wife loves reading fiction books, and she gets these books from the library and reads them in 1 or 2 days. And she said, she put the book down, she goes, "That book was great." And I said, "You liked it, huh?" And then she looked sad, and I said, "What's wrong?" She goes, "Now I have to come back into the real world."
Yeah. I remember one of my professors, Bruce Jorgensen, who's now a colleague, sort of strange because I've gone through this interesting situation where I married one of my English professors, Bruce Young, because I was an older student. I was 29, he was 34, he'd never been married, and I took literary criticism from him and then survived the semester, and then we started dating and got married. So the people who my professors are now really dear friends, because I've been in the department 28 years, because starting back from when I started my graduate work and met my husband. So Bruce Jorgensen was my professor back then, and he talked about his wife reading Willa Cather and doing it outside where it was really cold, and he said, "Donna, aren't you cold?" And she said, "Oh, no, but this book is so warm. I forgot that it was a cold day." And that's, it can have that effect where it transports you.
When you were a child, you mentioned growing up. Did you see yourself doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, I did, actually. I went to elementary school in Indiana, at least for a few years. And one of the things that we could do in kind of the off time where we didn't have a particular lesson was write. And everybody would do a little bit of writing. And at the end of the time of the school year, I actually left early because my father took us to Yucatan, which was the beginning of another adventure of my life. But my folder was so full of stories I had written that it burst. The staples burst. And actually, the kids sometimes would gather around, and I would read them a story, the kids in my class. So I loved writing, and I wanted to do acting, but as I got married and had children, I understood that would really not be a possibility. If you're doing acting, your evenings are gone for the time that you're rehearsing for the play. And with writing, nap time for my kids was writing time for me. And so it didn't matter to me what the house looked like. That was the time to kind of give myself space. And I believe actually made me a better mother because I had that creative outlet. So I wasn't feeling trapped by just the things that you do when you've got a toddler or a baby, the changing diapers and talking baby talk. I was reading because I knew that if you were going to write well, you had to read well, and you had to choose carefully what you were reading. And I actually was not writing the stuff